Hey guys, it's Chris. So, is our beloved Jon Snow really dead? Did the producers really take 5 seasons of hints and character development and just flush it down the toilet? So I want to do kind of a bonus Jon Snow video and why Jon Snow is not actually going to be dead after the season finale where he got stabbed by the Night's Watch. Book readers knew this was coming for 4 years since 2011 when A Dance with Dragons came out, but it did change quite a few things. Now the biggest theory is that Jon is Azor Ahai. So I'm going to talk about Azor Ahai and how Jon may fit into that and how Daenerys actually may fit into that as well. And also, I believe that the prince that was promised in Azor Ahai are probably the same thing. There's really no evidence to suggest that these prophecies are two different prophecies. The prince that was promised essentially is Azor Ahai, at least in my opinion. Different cultures had different names for this supposed hero. I believe that maybe even the stallion that mounts the world, who Drogo spoke of when her and Dany were married, is possibly even the same figure, because each of these cultures in this ice and fire world have this kind of prince that was promised Azor Ahai prophecy, although they do go by different names. So first of all, who is Azor Ahai? Well, essentially it's a prophecy that goes back to the time of the Age of Heroes, and the Age of Heroes was a period about 8,000 years ago in Westerosi history. That was actually when the wall was built, and it says that the last hero was essentially a guy who brought the last long night, which is the long winter, to an end by fighting off the White Walkers. Not a lot's actually known about what actually happened during that time period, but the prophecy says that this Azor Ahai will be reborn again, and there are several little pieces to this prophecy, and we'll try to make this short and sweet but understandable, that has to be fulfilled in order for somebody to be Azor Ahai. So what I'm going to do is go through these specific pieces of the prophecy that supposedly need to be fulfilled for someone to be Azor Ahai, and circle back around and talk about how Jon may fit into that role, and perhaps Dany as well, since they seem to be the two major characters, possibly Endgame material for A Song of Ice and Fire. The first one is to be born or possibly reborn under a bleeding star. Most people think that's the comet. The second and third both tied to the bleeding star, which is to be born among salt and smoke. The fourth one states that Azor Ahai must bear a flaming sword or a red sword. Now that can be many different things. You could take that literally as a sword that it's actually on fire, or you could take that as something like a Valyrian steel sword. So the sword thing is not necessarily a literal sword, because a lot of these prophecies, as the maesters explain in some of these backstories, are often misinterpreted. The next one will be that Azor Ahai has to have the dragon's blood, and that would be representative of Targaryen. So Aemon Targaryen specifically says that it has to be a Targaryen, and specifically it has to have the blood of Aerys, the late Mad King, and Rhaella Targaryen. Another possible sign of Azor Ahai is something to do with dragons. Now nobody's really sure what this means. Melisandre talks about waking dragons from stone, but something has to do with dragons in particular. And then the last one would be some type of sacrifice, where Azor Ahai may have to sacrifice his significant other or her significant other, perhaps wife or husband, to blood sacrifices to fulfill the prophecy. 7 different things that have to be fulfilled in some way, shape, or form in order for a character to be considered Azor Ahai. So how does this fit into Jon Snow? Well, first of all, we have to talk about Melisandre a little bit. She believed that Stannis was Azor Ahai reborn. They never really said this in the show, but that's who she was trying to force him to be, essentially. She tried to literally make each of these things happen. Stannis didn't fit all the criteria. She tried to force on him. So we remember the scene where she had him draw the sword out of fire and have a flaming sword and called it Lightbringer. And she did this at the time under the Red Comet. She had Stannis out on the beach pulling the sword from a flame and also burning the idols of the 7. So she was literally trying to make him fit the prophecy when he never really did. He fulfilled a few of those by doing those literal things. She tried to sell him on it, that he was Azor Ahai reborn and it was his destiny. And of course we saw in episode 10, Mother's Mercy of season 5, that he didn't fulfill shit, and he got his ass whipped, and basically that's the end of the Baratheon bloodline, other than Gendry, who apparently is still rolling somewhere in the middle of fucking nowhere. So I want to quickly go through and talk about each of these aspects of this prophecy and how Jon or Dany perhaps as well may actually fit into this, and kind of determine through theory that Jon may or may not be Azor Ahai, or Dany as well, or perhaps both, because there also is an aspect that's not really the prophetic part, but it has to do with the dragon has to have 3 heads. So that may mean 3 Azor Ahai people that fit the prophecy. That may mean Azor Ahai is one person, but he has 2 companions. That could also just be referring to Dany's 3 dragons, or perhaps 3 dragon riders at some point. So the first one, the Red Comet. So we know in season 1 that we had a red comet go by, and Melisandre had Stannis doing his little rebirth on the beach there, and that's also when Dany stepped into the flames and had her magical moment where she was reborn under the bleeding star, which again was the red-tailed comet that she called the Dragon's Tail, and had her magical moment where she hatched her dragons. So Dany does fulfill that part of the prophecy. So how does Jon fit into this part of the prophecy as far as the red star, the bleeding star, or something to that effect? So as far as the star aspect alone, there was a guy named Sir Patrick with Jon, and he just so happened to have a cloak on with stars on his cloak, but he was bleeding, therefore the star became red. So that could be the bleeding star that happened during Jon's death/rebirth. So Jon could very well fit that piece of prophecy as far as the bleeding star, because how convenient is that for a guy to be there with a cloak of stars, and then he was bleeding heavily and the stars became red on his cloak. I don't think that's just there accidentally. So the second and third parts, born of salt and smoke. So Dany fits this literally. She was born on Dragonstone when she was a child during the storm, which was the reason she has the name Daenerys Stormborn. Dragonstone has been described as the place of salt and smoke because of the salty sea and the smoky mist and that type of thing around the area. Melisandre herself said that Dragonstone is a place of salt and smoke. So Dany would fit that literally as far as being born there. So how does that fit for Jon? So Jon, when he died in the books again, or at least when he was stabbed, he had a guy there named Bowen Marsh that stabbed him and left the blade sticking in his stomach. When he pulled it out, it was described as a smoking wound, and it was described that Bowen Marsh was crying heavily. So you have the smoking wound, and you have the salty tears of Bowen Marsh, so that would represent the salt and the smoke. That was specifically pointed out in the books, along with the red star, or the bleeding star on the cloak of Sir Patrick, so that would make Jon fulfill that part of the prophecy as well. So what about this red or burning sword? Now again, this may not actually mean a literal sword, even though it possibly may. And Melisandre again tried to make Stannis fit this literally by actually pulling a sword from a flame. So Dany, she has dragons. That could actually represent Lightbringer as far as the actual sword, because in this world, really anything that does damage or kills people can be described as a sword. So her dragons themselves were actually described as a burning sword. So in that aspect, Dany fulfills that part of the prophecy. So what about Jon? Well, Jon carries around Longclaw, of course, and a lot of people believe that the red or burning sword doesn't actually represent a flaming sword, but more just referring to just a Valyrian steel sword. Lord Commander Mormont left him Longclaw, which is Valyrian steel, and also there's a chapter in the books where Sam Tarley's talking about this, and he actually believes, when they were actually speaking about the Azor Ahai prophecy, he believes that it refers to a Valyrian steel sword. Now, we all know Valyrian steel is different. It is forged by magic and dragon fire from the old volcanic metals in old Valyria. So the sword does not necessarily mean a literal sword. So in Dany's case, it could be her dragons with her dragon fire. In Jon's case, it could be the fact that he just has a red sword or Valyrian steel sword, and that could actually be Lightbringer. The next part of the prophecy represents a sacrifice or a blood sacrifice. And again, Dany fulfills this literally because she sacrificed both her unborn child Rhaego, and she also sacrificed her husband Drogo after the mage, using blood magic, turned him into a zombie essentially, and she smothered him with a pillow. Again, the magical night where she burned him on the pyre and hatched her dragons, which again was a one-time magical event. I want to throw this in here real quick too. A lot of people think that Targaryens are fireproof. They are not. They are heat resistant. They are not fireproof. There have been plenty of Targaryens that died via fire. This is a one-time magical event. So how does Jon fit that part of the prophecy? Well, right now I don't think he actually does. So this is a piece that kind of goes against Jon for the Azor Ahai prophecy. Then again, these prophecies are not necessarily set in stone either. So I don't think Jon fits this particular part of the prophecy yet, but there's still 2 books to come. And then the prophecy has something to do with dragons. And of course, this fits Dany literally because she literally has 3 dragons. She woke dragons from stone. That was the part of the prophecy, something about waking dragons from stone from Melisandre. Dany literally did this. She walked in the pyre, she had 3 stone dragon eggs and literally hatched 3 dragons, so she fits this perfectly. And Jon, at least at this point, really doesn't fit this part of the prophecy either. And then the last part of the prophecy is that Azor Ahai must have the dragon's blood or Targaryen blood. This was stated by several people in the books, most notably for show watchers, Maester Aemon, and he already believes that Dany is Azor Ahai reborn. And again, specifically the bloodline of Aerys, the Mad King, and Rhaella, his wife, and that fits Dany obviously to a T. She is the daughter of those 2 directly, but this also fits Jon Snow. We all know the R+L=J theory. They hinted at this all through the book and in the show as well through all 5 seasons, really heavily this last season. Jon is the son of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen, Dany's brother, who was killed by Robert in his rebellion. Jon fits this piece of the prophecy perfectly. That would be of the bloodline of Aerys and Rhaella Targaryen, just as Dany is, so he fits this part of the prophecy as well. So that's the prophecy of Azor Ahai, and that's the most common and probably the most supported theory out there as to who Jon Snow or Daenerys or possibly somebody else is, and that would give us the most evidence that Jon Snow is actually going to survive. And I believe he is. I believe that they both could fulfill this prophecy and be ice and fire, since he is half Stark and represents the ice side, and Dany with her dragons representing the fire side of the world, they could literally be ice and fire. And if Jon is in fact Rhaegar Targaryen's son, then he would be the embodiment of ice and fire, what the whole fucking show is about. In my opinion, there's no way that they take 5 seasons of hints and storylines to build this character up and tell his backstory and hint at his parentage, which he never got to find out before he died. Personally, I don't think he's going to be gone. Now, the actor may not be back in season 6 because he has done some of these interviews and said he's gone, but then again, he's not going to tell them anyway. They may not have told him yet he's going to be a different person. So he said specifically in the interviews that Jon Snow is dead. The producer of the show has said Jon Snow is dead. That doesn't mean Jon Targaryen won't be reborn or somebody called Azor Ahai or go by a different name. So I don't think they waste all this time. Although Game of Thrones likes to rip your heart out with these characters, he is an Endgame character. He is Endgame material, just like Dany is. They're both being built up this way, or as parallel characters. That would just be terrible storytelling if, in fact, they do all this just to whack him. You never hear anything about his parentage or his true destiny, and he just dies at the wall because a few guys got together and decided, fuck him, we don't like these wildlings he's letting in, so let's just whack him. And that's just, it doesn't fit the story, because this story is about Jon Snow and it is about Daenerys Targaryen. So my question for you guys is that what you guys think? The most popular and most supported fan theory is that Jon or Dany or both is Azor Ahai reborn, and we may see that in season 6. Perhaps we may not see that until season 7. They got a lot of stuff going on. Maybe Jon Snow does sit out season 7 just like Bran sit out season 5. So we'll see how that goes. But as far as the prophecy goes, Dany fits everything perfectly. So she actually fits all 7 signs of the prophecy. A couple of those are questionable and could be misinterpretations of the prophecy, so they don't necessarily have to fit all 7 perfectly. But the main ones would be the Bleeding Star, Born of Salt and Smoke, and the Targaryen bloodline, and they both fit those. So I don't think Jon Snow goes away for good. I think what they may do, and this is just speculation, so it's certainly not a spoiler because we're on the same page now. I think that in season 6 we may see a parallel moment between what happened with Dany in season 1 when her dragons hatched, when she had this one-time magical moment where she walks into the flames, comes out unburnt, she hatches 3 dragons, all this stuff that went down under the Bleeding Star and all that stuff that went down with her. Maybe we see Jon Snow at a funeral pyre go through the same thing, and Melisandre finally puts it together and realizes, wait a minute, this is Azor Ahai. Because here's the thing, Melisandre's at the wall. She's not there by accident. When she went back, she was sad, not because Stannis was dead. She didn't give a shit about him personally. She was mad because she had misinterpreted her prophecies. And she often does this in the books. She even says several times that she tries to get the Red God to give her a glimpse of Azor Ahai, and all he shows her is snow. That's a hell of a teaser if that's not something to do with Jon Snow. I mean, give me a break. Because if you hadn't figured it out yet, this show is not about who sits on the fucking Iron Throne. This show is about Daenerys Targaryen and Jon Snow and parallels they share. Again, let me know what you guys think. Hopefully this gives you some more information, a little more insight as to why he probably will survive, and we'll be back. Leave me a comment. Feel free to ask some questions. I'll do a Q&A video as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.